Across Southern Africa, politics is doing that thing where it smiles politely while quietly rearranging the furniture. In Zimbabwe, citizens showed up to speak and found the script already written. In Botswana, President Duma Boko suggested that former rivals in South Africa might need to start sharing a political bed. For stability, of course. From controlled conversations to forced cooperation, power is being stretched, squeezed, and strategically reimagined. And this is Second Take, here to dissect it all. My name is Ashwin Berry. Welcome to the show. Zimbabwe's constitution gets a bouncer, and his name is democracy. See, Zimbabwe has always had a complicated relationship with its constitution, like a couple that posts anniversary pictures while quietly sleeping in separate rooms. But the latest episode feels less like tension and more like a full-blown eviction notice. Enter the Constitution of Zimbabwe Amendment Bill number 3, CAB 3, if you like your constitutional crisis branded like sneakers. A document that promises technical reforms, but reads to its critics like a retirement plan that refuses to retire, and not quietly, loudly, publicly, permanently. Because somewhere between extending presidential terms from 5 to 7 years, moving presidential elections from the ballot box to parliament, because nothing says democracy like outsourcing it, and increasing presidential appointees like a WhatsApp group that never stops adding admins, something happened. Citizens showed up, and then, just as quickly, citizens were shown out. What followed in late March into early April wasn't a consultation process. It was theater, but without the courtesy of pretending to be fiction. In Harare City Sports Center, democracy wasn't debated, it was wrestled. Microphones became trophies, dissent became a security risk, and rights lawyer Doug Coulthard found himself not arguing law, but defending his own phone from being liberated mid-hearing. Tendai Biti, who has seen more constitutions than most people have seen election posters, had to be escorted out, not because he lost the argument, but because the argument was no longer allowed to exist. Across Bulawayo and beyond, the script repeated: packed venues, selective participation, and the kind of logistical arrangements that suggest the outcome had already been RSVP'd. Amnesty International warned, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission raised concerns, but the process moved with the confidence of a train that doesn't need passengers because it already knows where it is going. And so, the Constitution Defenders Forum, led by Tendai Biti, alongside the Defend the Constitution platform under Jameson Timber and the National Constitutional Assembly under Lovemore Maduku, did something radical. They left, not in protest of the Constitution, but in protest of the performance of consulting about it. They called it orchestration, not consultation, which is polite language for saying the music was playing, but nobody had been invited to dance unless they already knew the ZANU-PF steps. Munyara Dzigusai, never one to whisper when the microphone is available, translated the moment into something more direct. If speaking is denied, then protesting becomes grammar. Not a choice, but a language. A constitutional language, he insisted. And that is where Zimbabwe now stands. In a moment where the Constitution is no longer just a document, but a battleground over who gets to interpret it, extend it, and ultimately outlive it. Because at its heart, this is not about clauses or commissions. It is about time, who controls it, who extends it, and who gets told that their time as voters, as citizens, as participants can wait indefinitely, while the system reorganizes itself around permanence disguised as stability. Here is Bunyaradzi Gusai, Tendai Biti, and Lovemore Maduku.
Gusai with the DCP, but also with ISO, International Socialist Organization, with Lance, who's our general coordinator in the ISO. Thank you. I think yesterday Harare was clear that this is not just a shambolic shell. This is a constitutional coup that is happening directly before our eyes. And so for those reasons, this is why you saw us say there's a united force yesterday. And as a united force today, we are saying we are disengaging from this charade. We are calling on the people. We are disengaging in order to take this battle to where it really matters. We are disengaging to give this regime the real language it understands. The real language that it understands is the streets of this country, the factories of this country, the colleges of this country. That is a constitutionally enshrined right under Section 59 of the Constitution, the right to protest. So that is what we are going to do. But we are not saying the three movements that are here are going to do it alone. We have heard the cry of the people of Zimbabwe. We have heard the cry of the working class of Zimbabwe, the villagers, that we must do this as a united force. And this is the start that we're doing. And we are going to be consulting and uniting forces across the board for the people of Zimbabwe to speak. They have refused the people of Zimbabwe the right to speak. The people shall speak and claim their sovereignty in the streets of Zimbabwe. So that is their choice. We are ready for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Constitution. We are going to mobilize the people of Zimbabwe. This is the month that Geza called and stopped ZANU-PF from enforcing its 24 resolution. That's what we learned from Geza. And in respect and memory of Geza and all veterans and others, and that I think, yes, we're going to protest. It's a right that we have. Fundamental to this constitution is people's sovereignty across the entire constitutional framework. And for that reason, yes, we are. But as we said, this is going to be a united core, not just of the three of us as movements, the CDF, NCA, DCP, ourselves in Mashandi, the ISO, but across the churches have spoken, other political organizations have spoken, the ZCTU has spoken, and so forth. So yes, we will be making consultations and uniting the people of Zimbabwe to stand up for their rights and stop this thing. This thing is not going to pass. It is not going to be 300 people who are going to pass this thing and speak on behalf of millions. If Smith in 1969 held a referendum for the white folk to do his 1969 constitution, if Mugabe held a referendum in 2000, when there were no legal constitutional obligations, and Mugabe held a referendum in 2013, then if those did, there is no way Emerson Mnangagwa can deny the people of Zimbabwe the right to speak, and speak they shall. Thank you.
This constitution, and it's a cause which we are prepared to fight for. They've assaulted us, they've beaten us, they've arrested us, but we will not stop.
Conclusion, let me be clear. We cannot legitimize a process that silences the very people it claims to consult. The Constitution belongs to the people of Zimbabwe, and its future must be determined by them, not imposed upon them. We call upon all Zimbabweans to remain peaceful, vigilant, and engaged. The defense of the Constitution is now firmly in the hands of the citizens. They like this. This does not change the fact that Parliament still has to make a decision. So Parliament can still say they don't want to do, irrespective of what is said. So this process is a process only of consultation. It does not change the law. Okay? It also does not change the requirement for a referendum, which is incorporated. It does not stress it.
I think it's okay. I think it's okay. It answers the issue that we all do that. What we are witnessing is an abuse of power. It's an abuse. You abuse resources. You go out there and just do. Why would you bus people around? And why would you have one venue in a province or one venue in a district? It's an abuse. Yeah.
So it's carefully choreographed. There were 20 buses in Epworth that were fully fed on fast food. Those same buses were now at the City Sports Center in the afternoon. The same happened in Chitungisa. The same crowd that was at Dema was then transported in the same buses to the Chitungisa Aquatic Complex. It happened in Bulawayo. The same crowd that was at the large white city hall were then transported to Ngeta. The only difference is that in the morning they had chicken slice, in the afternoon they chicken in, but the same crowd. So you are seeing this choreographed charade of ZANU-PF rallies. And the thing is so well planned. You can see the signs and echoes of Bukurawundi there, the signs and echoes of 2008, a very dangerous process. Yesterday, anything could have happened. Doug Coulter could have lost his life. You people would have lost your equipment. All of us would have been assaulted, yesterday. So quite clearly, the only logical position is that enough is enough. We can't continue legitimizing a charade, and we are therefore disengaging, but not from the constitutional process, as we have emphasized.
We had 64 DCCs of ZANU-PF and one PCC which was held at the City Sports Center, presided over by the Secretary General of ZANU-PF, who sometimes masquerades as the Speaker of the National Assembly. We can't have this.
With the DCP, but also with ISO, International Socialist Organization, with Lance, who's our General Coordinator in the ISO. Thank you. I think yesterday it was clear that this is not just a shambolic shell. This is a constitutional coup that is happening directly before our eyes. And so for those reasons, this is why you saw us say there's a united force yesterday. And as a united force today, we are saying we are disengaging from this charade. We are calling on the people. We are disengaging in order to take this battle to where it really matters. We are disengaging to give this regime the real language it understands. The real language that it understands is the streets of this country, the factories of this country, the colleges of this country. That is a constitutionally enshrined right under Section 59 of the Constitution, the right to protest. So that is what we are going to do. But we are not saying the three movements that are here are going to do it alone. We have heard the cry of the people of Zimbabwe. We have heard the cry of the working class of Zimbabwe, the villagers, that we must do this as a united.
So it's carefully choreographed. There were 20 buses in Epworth that were fully fed on fast food. Those same buses were now at the City Sports Center in the afternoon. The same happened in Chitungisa. The same crowd that was at Dema was then transported in the same buses to the Chitungisa Aquatic Complex. It happened in Bulawayo. The same crowd that was at the large white city hall were then transported to Ngeta. The only difference is that in the morning they had chicken slice, in the afternoon they had chicken in, but the same crowd. So you are seeing this choreographed charade of ZANU-PF rallies. And the thing is so well planned. You can see the signs and echoes of Bukurawundi there, the signs and echoes of 2008, a very dangerous process. Yesterday, anything could have happened. Doug Coulter could have lost his life. You people would have lost your equipment. All of us would have been assaulted, yesterday. So quite clearly, the only logical position is that enough is enough. We can't continue legitimizing a charade, and we are therefore disengaging, but not from the constitutional process, as we have emphasized.
We had 64 DCCs of ZANU-PF and one PCC which was held at the City Sports Center, presided over by the Secretary General of ZANU-PF, who sometimes masquerades as the Speaker of the National Assembly. We can't have this.
Before we even get to the poetry of it all, there is a moment, sharp, unscripted, and deeply revealing. Student leader Denford Sitole stands up in Bulawayo, not as an invited voice, but as an inconvenient one. He speaks against the bill directly, clearly, and in doing so, disrupts the rhythm of what was meant to be a carefully managed conversation. And then, just as abruptly, he is led away by unidentified individuals. Later, he is found at a police station, charged. Other accounts suggest he was seized almost immediately after presenting his opposition. It is a sequence that feels less like law enforcement and more like stage management, the removal of a character who has gone off script. The proposed amendment at the center of this moment would suspend the 2028 elections and shift presidential selection to parliament, a redesign of democracy presented as administrative refinement. And now we turn to the video. Denford Sitole, mid-speech, mid-thought, saying what many suspect but few are allowed to articulate.
Right now, they are very much afraid of airing out their country. I'm 100% against the constitution in number 3. We seek to take over the power of the people in mandating the President of Zimbabwe. What we are saying is, my submission is informed by the values and principles of the national struggle. In the liberation struggle, one day one vote was 8% of the liberation struggle. And young people are ready to partake in another liberation struggle, which means that you are going to take away our right to electricity. Now, number 2, we also want to elect our leaders, because we want our leaders to know that we have mandated them and they owe us. You have removed, you want to remove the mandate from the citizens. You want to put it in a few powers they need. We're going to vote, we're going to give them things, we're going to give them money, we're going to give them law, so that we can elect the president who is voting.
There is something almost poetic about a public consultation process where the public is optional. Zimbabwe's hearings on CAB 3 didn't collapse, they revealed. They revealed a political culture where participation is not invited but curated, where dissent is not debated but managed, and where the idea of the people have spoken depends heavily on which people you allowed through the door. In theory, one meeting per district sounds democratic, like a national conversation happening in installments. In practice, it became a traveling roadshow of selective listening. Small venues, tight schedules, and an atmosphere that suggested urgency not for inclusion, but for completion, just getting it done. Because when you are extending terms, redesigning electoral systems, and quietly relocating the power of voter registration from an independent commission back to an office historically associated with the state, you don't want a conversation. You want momentum. And momentum does not ask questions. It just moves. What made this moment particularly Zimbabwean and therefore profoundly African is not that power sought to consolidate itself. That's not new. It is that citizens recognized the choreography and refused to participate in the dance. The withdrawal by civic groups was not just an exit. It was a statement that legitimacy cannot be borrowed from a process that has already decided its conclusions. That the presence of opposition in a room does not make the room democratic if the microphones are selectively functional. And that participation, when stripped of influence, becomes decoration. There is also something telling in the design of the bill itself. Extending presidential and parliamentary terms to 7 years is presented as stability, because apparently 5 years is too rushed for governance. But 7 years is just enough time to finish what you started and start something else. Moving presidential elections to parliament reframes democracy as efficiency. Why ask millions of citizens when a room full of politicians can decide for them? And increasing presidential appointees to the Senate is simply administrative generosity, because nothing says balance like appointing more people who already agree with you. But perhaps the most profound shift is not structural, it is psychological. When citizens are blocked, booed, or physically prevented from participating, the message is not just about that moment. The message is about future moments. It is about teaching a population that engagement has limits, that dissent has consequences, and that sometimes the safest form of participation is absence. Which is why the call for protest matters, not because protests are new, but because they represent a migration of political expression from formal spaces to public ones, from parliament to the street, from microphones to movement. And in that shift lies both risk and revelation. Because when citizens stop believing that institutions will hear them, they begin to speak in ways that institutions cannot control. And history across this continent has shown that once that language becomes widespread, it is very difficult to translate it back into silence. Now, if Zimbabwe's story is about citizens leaving the room, Botswana's President Duma Boko walked into a different room entirely, South Africa's, and started rearranging the furniture. Now, in fairness, Boko did not arrive uninvited. He arrived with credentials. A man who helped dismantle nearly 6 decades of Botswana Democratic Party rule through coalition politics. Now speaking from the authority of someone who didn't just theorize change, he organized it. And so, when he stands at the Botswana National Front Congress in Palapye, celebrating 60 years of political existence while simultaneously offering South Africa a political future, you tend to listen, even if you might not agree, especially if you don't agree. Because Boko's message was simple and therefore dangerous. Coalition politics is not an option. It is the future, he said. And not just the future in theory, but the future in practice. The kind that requires enemies to become partners, ideologies to become negotiable, and pride to become flexible. His call for the African National Congress and the economic freedom fighters to unite is less about those two parties specifically and more about a broader Pan-African question. What happens when liberation movements can no longer govern alone? What happens when the mathematics of elections begins to challenge the mythology of dominance? And what happens when the only way forward requires those who once defined themselves against each other to now define themselves with each other? Boko, with the confidence of a man who has already tested this formula, suggested that what unites these parties is greater than what divides them, which is a beautiful sentence, until you remember that politics is often about precisely those divisions. The ANC carries the weight of history, liberation, governance, compromise. The EFF carries the energy of disruption, radicalism, impatience, ideological clarity. Asking them to unite is not just a political suggestion, it is an emotional negotiation. And yet, Boko adds urgency with a phrase that refuses to be ignored: the rise of a different kind of Hitler. Now, whether you interpret that as a warning against extremism, monopoly power, or simply the dangers of fragmented politics, the effect is the same. It raises the stakes. It transforms coalition building from strategy to necessity, from preference to prevention. And perhaps that is Boko's real intervention, not in telling South Africa what to do, but in reminding the region that the cost of disunity is not theoretical. It is historical. Africa has seen what happens when power fragments, when alliances collapse, when political actors prioritize identity over outcome. And so, Boko's message, controversial as it may be, is rooted in a Pan-African instinct that stability, development, and democracy in one country are never entirely local. They ripple, they influence, they warn, and sometimes they invite unsolicited advice from neighbors who have recently figured something out and are eager to share it before it stops working. Here's Duma Boko.
In South Africa and say to them, And I said this before when I was on South African soil many years ago. I said coalition politics is going to be the future of politics in our region at the very least. Aggregation politics. Political parties are going to have to come together, strike compromises, because Hitler was able to rise because two critical players in that society failed to strike compromises and come together. And this fatal error resulted in the rise of Hitler. Hitler may be rising in South Africa, a different kind of Hitler. Some of you call it monopoly capital. Whatever name you ascribe to it, there's a threat looming. It threatens you, it threatens all of us. It seems to me, and I'm no expert on your politics, it calls for a careful reflection on the approach henceforth. Economic freedom fighters, the African National Congress, all of them must step up in order to step back and reflect on the existential threat that faces their country and the rest of the region, and indeed the continent. And when they do, I hope they rise above and beyond some of these differences and realize that what unites them is bigger and stronger than anything that could divide them. Just a wild thought thrown by a brother, a friend.
What connects Zimbabwe's constitutional crisis and Botswana's coalition sermon is not geography, it is timing. Across Southern Africa, something is shifting. Not loudly, not uniformly, but undeniably. The era of unquestioned single-party dominance is being interrupted, sometimes by opposition alliances, sometimes by internal fractures, and sometimes by citizens who are simply no longer willing to participate in processes that feel predetermined. In Zimbabwe, power is attempting to stabilize itself through extension, longer terms, reconfigured electoral systems, more controlled pathways to leadership. In Botswana, power was recently redistributed through coalition, multiple parties finding enough common ground to replace a long-standing ruling structure. And in South Africa, the conversation sits somewhere in between a governing party that no longer commands outright majority, negotiating its relevance in the landscape that now requires partnership. These are not isolated developments. They are variations of the same question. How does power adapt when the conditions that sustained it begin to change? Zimbabwe's answer appears to be consolidation. Botswana's answer has been collaboration. South Africa's answer is still being negotiated, sometimes publicly, sometimes reluctantly. And in the background of all this is the citizen, watching, participating, withdrawing, protesting, voting, or refusing to do any of the above. Because perhaps the most important shift is not happening within governments, but around them. Citizens are becoming less predictable, less patient, less willing to accept that the mechanisms of democracy are sufficient if the outcomes feel predetermined. And that unpredictability is forcing political systems to respond, sometimes by opening up, sometimes by tightening control. Boko's vision of coalition politics as the future suggests a continent moving toward shared power, negotiated governance, and the uncomfortable but necessary art of compromise. Zimbabwe's current trajectory suggests a different instinct: to secure power before it becomes uncertain. And between these two approaches lies a broader Pan-African reality that the continent is no longer politically static. It is experimenting, sometimes successfully, sometimes painfully, but always visibly. And in that visibility lies the satire. Because for all the speeches about unity, stability, and development and underlying story, this is the adaptation. Leaders adapting to new political realities, opposition adapting to restricted spaces, citizens adapting to systems that sometimes listen and sometimes don't. And through it all, Africa continues to do what it has always done: negotiate itself, publicly, passionately, imperfectly, with just enough humor to survive the seriousness of it all. My name is Ashwin Bedi, and this has been Second Take.